She had never felt an embrace until a silent widower showed her what true love is. Amina had grown up in a house where silence was louder than words. From the moment she could remember, the walls of her childhood home were filled with rules and routine, but very little warmth. Her parents were kind in their own ways, yet their love was often measured, hidden behind instructions and expectations rather than open embraces or gentle encouragement. Hugs were rare, and words of affection rarer still. Amina had learned early that love could be shown through actions: food on the table, clothes on her back, a roof over her head, but the deep, comforting kind of love that made your heart feel safe. That was a mystery she had never known. As a little girl, she would watch other families in the neighborhood. Children running to their parents for a hug after school, mothers brushing hair from their children's faces, fathers holding their kids close after a rough day. These moments fascinated her. She didn't feel jealous so much as curious, as if she were seeing a secret part of life that existed just out of her reach. At night, she would sometimes wrap her arms around herself, pressing her cheek against the cool pillow, wishing she could feel the warmth of an embrace that was not her own. School offered Amina a brief taste of connection. She had friends, laughter, and shared moments in classrooms and playgrounds, but even there, something felt distant. She was the girl who excelled in her studies, who always finished her assignments on time, who never caused trouble. Teachers praised her, classmates admired her, but no one ever saw the quiet longing in her eyes. Even her closest friends didn't know that when she smiled, it was sometimes a mask for the emptiness inside. She had learned to carry her sadness alone, to protect herself from the sting of unspoken needs. By the time she entered her 20s, Amina had grown accustomed to the quiet. She had a stable job at a small publishing company, where she spent her days surrounded by words and stories, ironically learning about love and life through the experiences of others. She loved books because they allowed her to live vicariously, to feel emotions she didn't experience in her own life. Romantic scenes, warm family moments, friendships tested and proven true, they fascinated her. But every time she closed a book and returned to her apartment, she felt the cold emptiness settle back in. Her life was orderly, predictable, and safe, but it was also quiet in a way that sometimes felt unbearably lonely. Her apartment was small but neat. Each item had a place, each corner was tidy, and everything gleamed under the soft glow of the evening lamp. To the outside eye, it was the picture of independence and self-sufficiency, but Amina often felt like a guest in her own life. The walls were too close, the air too still. On nights when she was alone, she would sit by the window, watching families walking past, children laughing as they held their parents' hands, lovers huddled close under umbrellas. Each scene made a quiet ache rise in her chest, a yearning for something she had never experienced but had always dreamed of. Her parents had noticed her quiet demeanor, of course, and they often attributed it to shyness or thoughtfulness. "She's just serious," her mother would say with a small, approving smile. "She doesn't need friends all the time." And her father would nod silently, returning to his newspaper, unaware that his approval felt distant and detached. They meant well, yet their way of loving her had been careful and restrained, always measured, never free-flowing. Amina understood that love could take many forms, but she wondered whether she would ever know the kind that made the heart feel full. Even friendships outside her family carried a similar pattern. Amina had companions who admired her intelligence and reliability, who invited her to parties or weekend outings, but she never allowed herself to become too close. There was an invisible barrier she had built, a shield that kept others at a safe distance. She had learned that the heart could grow heavy if you let it long for things that might never be yours. Still, even as she kept her distance, she sometimes caught herself longing for the small gestures she had seen in others. A hand on her shoulder, someone noticing when she was sad, a simple word of reassurance that said, "You are not alone." life continued in its quiet rhythm. Amina's days were filled with routines, work, commuting, preparing meals, reading in the evenings. But even routine could not fill the void she carried inside. Sometimes she would take a long walk through the city, blending into the crowds of people, silently observing the lives around her. She noticed the way strangers interacted, the way someone's laughter could brighten a room, the way someone's hand could find another's in a comforting touch. Each sight was both beautiful and painful, a reminder of what she had never known. One day, as Amina returned from work, she noticed a moving truck parked near her apartment building. Curious, she watched as a middle-aged man carefully carried boxes inside a unit on her floor. He moved slowly, deliberately, his expression calm but tinged with sadness. There was a quiet dignity about him, a sense that he carried some weight that was not visible to the casual observer. Amina found herself drawn to this new presence. She didn't know why, but she felt a flutter of curiosity, a spark of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Perhaps it was the way he moved, careful yet purposeful, or perhaps it was something deeper, something in the air that suggested his life had also known loss. The days that followed, Amina observed him from a distance. She noticed the small things, how he watered a tiny plant by his window, how he paused to help a neighbor lift a heavy bag, how he always seemed to carry a quiet, gentle calm. There were no dramatic gestures, no loud displays of emotion, yet every action spoke volumes. It was subtle, yet it resonated in a way that Amina could not ignore. For the first time in her adult life, she felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, interest, curiosity, perhaps even hope. Despite her cautious nature, Amina found herself thinking about him. She wondered about his story, what had brought him to her building, what experiences had shaped the quiet man who moved with such care and gentleness. She realized that she had never allowed herself to wonder about such things before. Her life had been contained, organized, predictable, and safe, but the new presence disrupted that quiet. It was unsettling and exciting all at once, stirring emotions she had long buried beneath her routines. One evening, the quiet hum of the city outside her window seemed louder than usual. Amina sat with a cup of tea in her hands, staring at the fading light of the sunset. Thoughts of her childhood, her loneliness, her yearning for warmth, and the silent neighbor swirled in her mind. She realized how much she had lived in isolation, even in the company of others. She had been surrounded by people, yet her heart had remained untouched by true connection. That evening, she made a small decision. Perhaps it was time to pay attention, to notice the small gestures that spoke louder than words, and to allow herself to feel something new. Little did she know, her life was on the brink of change. The quiet presence of the new neighbor, the gentle dignity in his movements, and the subtle acts of kindness she had begun to notice, would soon challenge everything she thought she knew about love, connection, and intimacy. Amina's story, which had been defined by solitude and longing, was about to take a turn. She had spent decades waiting for an embrace, for the feeling of safety in someone else's arms, and though she did not yet know it, that moment would come when she least expected it. For now she watched, she wondered, and she quietly hoped. The first seeds of something she had never felt before, affection, warmth, true understanding, were taking root. She did not know the full story yet, but her heart, long dormant, was beginning to awaken. And sometimes, the smallest flicker of hope is all it takes to begin a journey that will change a life forever. Amina went to bed that night with her mind full of thoughts and a heart that felt slightly lighter. Perhaps love was not loud or dramatic. Perhaps it was quiet, patient, and gentle. Perhaps it could be found in the ordinary, the everyday, and the unnoticed. She drifted to sleep with the faintest sense of anticipation, unaware that her life was about to shift in ways she could never have imagined, all because of a silent man moving into the apartment next door. The days after the new neighbor moved in brought a quiet change to Amina's life. At first, it was subtle. She noticed small things, the soft hum of his movements in the hallway, the careful way he closed his door, the way he paused to greet the elderly woman across the landing. Nothing dramatic happened, but there was a sense of presence she hadn't felt before, a quiet reassurance that seemed to exist even without words. Amina's curiosity grew with each passing day. She found herself lingering by the window a little longer, hoping to catch a glimpse of him tending to the small plant on his balcony or arranging boxes in a way that seemed meticulous yet gentle. She realized she was watching a man who moved through the world with care, a man who seemed to notice things others overlooked. It was a kind of attentiveness she had never experienced, a quiet observation that suggested thoughtfulness and depth. Their first real interaction was almost accidental. One morning, Amina had spilled some water while watering the few plants she had on her balcony. She bent down quickly to clean it up, but the spray had reached the edge, dripping onto the corridor below. Rashid, passing by to leave for work, paused, looked up, and gave her a small nod. She felt a jolt, a spark of connection, though neither of them spoke more than a few words. "Careful," he said, his voice soft yet calm. Amina looked up and smiled awkwardly, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. In the following days, she noticed his quiet gestures more and more. He helped the elderly neighbor carry her groceries, making no fuss but offering steady support. He bent down to pick up a coin that had fallen from a child's pocket, returning it with a small, genuine smile. Amina watched these moments unfold with fascination. There was something in his quiet kindness, something unspoken yet profoundly moving, that drew her in. For the first time in her life, she saw someone whose actions matched the depth of feeling she had always longed to experience. Amina's thoughts became preoccupied with him. She would replay small moments in her mind. The way his hands moved as he tied the laces of his shoes, the careful way he folded packages of newspapers he sometimes delivered for extra income, the thoughtful way he adjusted a fallen flower pot on the balcony. She realized she was drawn to him not because of charm or words, but because of the quiet dignity in his being, the silent love he seemed capable of giving. One rainy evening, a chance encounter brought them closer. A sudden downpour caught Amina off guard as she returned from work. She fumbled with her umbrella, which refused to open properly, and struggled with the heavy bag in her hands. Rashid appeared almost silently at her side, holding his own umbrella with one hand while steadying her bag with the other. They stood together in the rain, sharing the umbrella, close enough that she could feel the gentle warmth of his presence without fully understanding why it affected her so. "Thank you," Amina said softly, her voice barely rising above the sound of the rain. "You're welcome," Rashid replied, his tone calm and reassuring. There was no awkwardness, no unnecessary words, just a quiet understanding that felt comfortable and safe. In that brief moment, Amina felt something she had never felt before. It wasn't just gratitude, it was the stirrings of something deeper, a recognition that this man had the power to touch her heart in ways she had never known. From that day on, small interactions became a regular part of her life. Rashid never forced conversation or tried to impress her. He didn't seek attention or approval. Instead, he offered consistency, patience, and quiet presence. Amina found herself looking forward to the small moments when their paths crossed. A polite greeting in the hallway, a nod as she watered her plants, a shared smile over the mailboxes. Each moment, though ordinary to the outside world, felt significant to her. One afternoon, Amina faced a stressful situation at work. Her editor had demanded last-minute changes to a manuscript, and the pressure felt overwhelming. As she returned home, her hands shook with tension, and tears threatened to spill. Rashid noticed her from the corridor. Without asking questions, he gestured toward the small garden area in front of the building. "Take a break," he said quietly. "Sit for a moment." Amina hesitated but then allowed herself to follow his suggestion. They sat on a bench beneath a tree, the leaves dripping from the recent rain. The silence between them was comfortable, not awkward. Amina realized how rare it was to feel this ease with another person. Normally, she carried her burdens alone, but sitting next to Rashid, she felt a strange sense of relief, as if her stress had already begun to lift simply because he was there. Over time, Amina began to notice patterns in Rashid's life. He lived simply, moved slowly, and seemed to carry memories in the careful way he arranged his things. Sometimes she saw him pause and touch a photograph on his wall, a small smile on his lips, and she realized that grief was part of his story. He had lost someone he loved deeply, yet he had continued to live with dignity and patience. This made her respect him even more. There was depth in his silence, a richness of emotion that was unspoken but deeply felt. Amina also began to reflect on her own life in comparison. She had lived for years in emotional isolation, longing for warmth she had never received. Observing Rashid helped her recognize that love and connection could exist even without grand gestures. Small, consistent acts of care, quiet attentiveness, and patient understanding were sometimes more powerful than words. She had read about love in books and stories, but here it was before her, quiet and real, unfolding slowly through the presence of a man who had known both loss and kindness. One evening, as they both returned from errands, a stray cat appeared near the building. Rashid knelt down, speaking softly to it, offering some scraps of food he had brought. Amina watched him, mesmerized. He didn't ask her to watch or comment, he simply acted with care. She realized she was drawn not only to his kindness, but also to the effortless way he could show empathy and consideration. It was a lesson in patience, a lesson in seeing the world and others with gentle eyes. Their conversations began to deepen naturally. Rashid never pressed her for personal details, but when she spoke, he listened intently. He remembered small things she mentioned, a favorite flower, a preferred type of tea, the story of her childhood pet, and incorporated them into his gestures, quietly showing that he paid attention. Amina found herself opening up to him, revealing pieces of her life she had never shared with anyone else. She felt safe, and the walls she had built over decades began to tremble ever so slightly. Amina also noticed how Rashid never judged her emotions. When she expressed frustration, he nodded, offering no advice unless she asked. When she laughed at a small joke, he smiled in return, genuine and unassuming. The more she observed him, the more she realized that connection did not need grand declarations or dramatic actions. Sometimes it was enough to simply be present, to allow another person to exist without pressure or expectation. One particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city lights began to flicker on, Amina found herself walking with Rashid. They strolled slowly through the quiet streets, the sound of their footsteps blending with the distant hum of traffic. Neither of them spoke much, yet the silence was comforting, filled with a shared understanding. Amina felt a sense of anticipation she could not name, a quiet stirring in her chest that made her heart feel lighter and more alive than it had in years. It became clear to Amina that Rashid's presence had already begun to change her. She smiled more freely, found joy in small moments, and felt a spark of curiosity about life that had been missing for so long. Even in ordinary days, his quiet companionship made her feel seen, valued, and understood. She realized that love in its most genuine form could be patient, silent, and gentle, a truth she had only begun to comprehend. Though she did not yet know the full story, Amina sensed that her life was shifting. The loneliness she had carried for decades was slowly giving way to hope. The simple gestures of a man who had experienced loss and yet remained kind and attentive had touched her heart in ways she could not fully explain. She had never felt an embrace, never known what it was to be held with genuine care, but something deep inside her whispered that this could be the beginning of something extraordinary. And so, with each passing day, she watched, learned, and allowed herself to feel the quiet presence of a man who might one day show her what love truly was. She did not yet know how, when, or in what form, but she could feel the first stirrings of connection taking root. For the first time in her life, Amina felt that something real, something patient and enduring, was beginning to touch her heart. The days slowly turned into weeks, and Amina found herself noticing Rashid in ways she had never imagined. At first, it was subtle. The way he adjusted the angle of a flower in his tiny garden, the way he carefully wrapped a package for the post, the soft hum of a tune he seemed to carry in his mind while moving through the apartment corridor. But over time, these small observations became a quiet fascination. Amina realized that she was drawn to him not because of looks or charm, but because of a kind of presence she had never encountered before. There was depth in his silence, and a gentle patience in his every gesture that spoke of understanding, loss, and care. One evening, after a long day at work, Amina returned home feeling unusually tired and anxious. The deadlines at her office had piled up, and minor frustrations had compounded into a heavy weight she could not easily shake. She dragged herself to the bench in the small garden courtyard, where she had often observed Rashid tending to his plants. He was already there, kneeling gently beside a row of flowers, his hands careful and deliberate as he worked. Rashid noticed her immediately but did not speak. Instead, he continued with his work, offering her the gift of quiet companionship. Amina sank onto the bench, letting her shoulders slump and her chest heave with the stress she had been carrying. She didn't know why, but the sight of him there, silently present and steady, brought her an unusual sense of relief. She felt as if she could breathe freely for the first time that day, as though the air around him carried a kind of calm she had never known. After a few moments of silence, Rashid finally spoke, his voice soft and unhurried. "Long day." Amina nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "Very long," she admitted, feeling exposed but oddly safe in his presence. He did not offer advice or try to fix her problems. He did not ask her to explain every detail or apologize for her struggles. He simply sat there, waiting patiently, letting her emotions exist without judgment. And in that patient waiting, Amina felt a warmth growing inside her chest, a spark of something she had never experienced before. Over the following days, their friendship deepened. Rashid's gentle presence became a constant in her life. He noticed when she seemed tired or stressed and offered small gestures, a cup of tea left at her door, a quiet nod in the hallway, the soft reassurance of his calm gaze. Amina began to realize that connection did not always need words. Sometimes, the most profound communication came through shared presence, through attention and care that required no explanation. One evening, Amina faced an overwhelming situation. She had stayed late at work to finish a project, and when she finally returned home, she felt utterly exhausted. Her body ached, and her mind was racing with a mix of anxiety and self-doubt. As she walked toward her apartment, she noticed Rashid outside, quietly sweeping the courtyard. When he saw her, he didn't call out or ask what had happened. Instead, he gestured toward a bench nearby. Amina hesitated but then allowed herself to sit. She felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease, simply by being near him. Rashid sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body without feeling crowded. The rain from earlier had left the air fresh and cool, the faint scent of wet soil mingling with the fragrance of flowers. It was peaceful, a small sanctuary in the midst of her otherwise chaotic life. For a long time, they simply sat in silence. Amina felt an unfamiliar comfort in that quiet, the kind that comes not from conversation or distraction, but from simply being present with someone who truly sees you. Tears threatened to spill, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of finally feeling safe and understood. Rashid noticed her trembling shoulders and, without hesitation, moved slightly closer. He didn't speak, he didn't ask questions, but he offered something far more powerful, a silent understanding, a presence that said, "It's okay, you are not alone." Then, gently, almost instinctively, he reached out and pulled her into an embrace. Amina froze at first, her mind racing, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sensation of being held. But slowly, as the warmth of his arms enveloped her, she felt a wave of comfort she had never known. It was not a dramatic or passionate gesture, but it was profound in its simplicity. The embrace was steady, reassuring, and completely free of expectation. For the first time in her life, she felt the kind of safety that comes from being held with genuine care. In that embrace, years of loneliness and longing seemed to melt away. Amina realized that she had spent decades yearning for this simple, human connection, a feeling she had never known but had always imagined. She felt the weight of her past lift slightly, replaced by a sense of belonging, a sense that she was worthy of being cared for and understood. Her heart, which had been cautious and guarded for so long, began to open in small, trembling ways. The moments that followed were gentle and natural. They stayed in the courtyard until the sky darkened, talking softly about trivial things, the weather, the flowers, the small events of their day. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced, but every word and gesture was laden with authenticity. Amina noticed how Rashid's attention never wavered, how he listened without interruption, how his presence never demanded anything from her. It was a stark contrast to the relationships she had known in her past, where affection was either absent or conditional. Over the next few days, their bond grew quietly. Rashid continued to show his care in subtle ways. He would bring extra tea when he knew she had stayed late, help her carry groceries without fanfare, and offer small gestures that conveyed attentiveness and respect. Amina began to recognize the difference between fleeting gestures of affection and consistent, patient care. She realized that love was not always loud, grand, or immediate. Sometimes it was silent, steady, and nurturing. Amina's perspective on relationships also began to change. She had spent years thinking that love was something distant, almost unattainable. Observing Rashid, she learned that love could be expressed in quiet, ordinary ways, through actions, through attention, through consistency. She began to notice her own feelings shift. Her heart, once closed off and cautious, now responded to his presence with warmth, curiosity, and hope. She felt safe allowing herself to feel, to notice, to hope. One evening, they went for a walk through the nearby park, the setting sun casting golden light over the trees. Amina felt a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She realized that she was beginning to care for Rashid deeply, and the realization was both exhilarating and frightening. She had never allowed herself to feel such closeness with anyone, and yet, with him, it felt natural. Every glance, every shared smile, every quiet gesture added layers to her emotions. The pivotal moment came on a quiet night when Amina returned from a particularly stressful week. She felt emotionally drained, physically exhausted, and mentally tense. Rashid noticed immediately, offering her a gentle smile and a quiet invitation to sit in the courtyard. She accepted, and for the first time she allowed herself to cry openly, letting the weight of her past, her struggles, and her loneliness spill out. Rashid held her without words, his embrace steady and reassuring. It was the first time she had ever felt completely safe in someone else's arms, the first time she had truly known the power of human connection. As she leaned against him, Amina reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about her childhood, her family, her quiet life, and all the moments when she had longed for warmth and understanding. She realized that the longing she had carried for so long was finally being answered, not in grand gestures, but in simple, patient, and consistent care. She felt gratitude, awe, and a quiet joy that had never existed in her life before. The embrace was transformative. It showed her that love could be gentle, patient, and deeply reassuring. It reminded her that human connection was not always loud or dramatic. It could be subtle, quiet, and profoundly moving. In Rashid's arms, Amina felt the beginnings of healing, a soft mending of old wounds, and a newfound understanding that she was worthy of affection, trust, and love. From that night on, Amina and Rashid's relationship deepened naturally. They spent more time together, shared quiet conversations, and continued to observe and care for each other in ways that spoke volumes without the need for dramatic declarations. Amina began to see herself differently, with more confidence, more warmth, and a willingness to open her heart. The first embrace had shown her what she had been missing, and now, with Rashid's patient presence, she began to embrace life in new ways. Their bond was not about rushing or overwhelming emotions. It was about trust, understanding, and the steady rhythm of shared presence. Rashid's silent patience taught Amina that love could be consistent and reliable, that the simplest gestures could carry the deepest meaning, and that healing was possible even after years of longing. She began to feel hope and courage, knowing that she could allow herself to be loved without fear, without judgment, and without pressure. By the end of that week, Amina realized that her life had begun to change in small but significant ways. She smiled more freely, laughed with a lightness she hadn't felt in years, and noticed the beauty in ordinary moments. She felt gratitude for the man who had quietly shown her what it meant to be cared for, who had introduced her to the idea that love could be gentle, steady, and deeply healing. And though she did not yet know what the future held, she felt certain of one thing. Her heart had begun to awaken, and the first embrace had lit a spark that would guide her toward a life filled with warmth, trust, and the possibility of true love. After the first embrace, Amina's life began to shift in ways she had never imagined. It was not a sudden, dramatic change, but a quiet, steady transformation that took root in her heart and mind. Each day, she became more aware of her own emotions, more attuned to the subtle joys in life, and more willing to accept care and affection without fear. Rashid's presence, steady and patient, became a comforting constant, a reminder that love could exist in its purest, simplest form. Their days together became a tapestry of small but meaningful moments. They would meet in the courtyard, tending to the tiny garden that had become a shared sanctuary. Rashid would kneel beside the flower beds, carefully planting new seedlings, while Amina swept fallen leaves or watered the plants with gentle hands. They spoke little during these times, but the silence was not empty. It was filled with understanding, connection, and the unspoken acknowledgement that their hearts were slowly intertwining. Amina realized that these ordinary acts were teaching her more about love than any story she had ever read. One afternoon, Rashid invited her to help him rearrange his apartment. The task was simple, moving furniture and dusting shelves, but it became an exercise in trust and shared effort. They laughed over small mistakes, Amina dropping a vase slightly too hard, Rashid knocking a stack of books, but there was no judgment, only gentle teasing and camaraderie. These shared tasks, ordinary as they seemed, brought them closer. Amina found herself appreciating the rhythm of daily life in a new way, seeing beauty in cooperation, patience, and mutual care. Amina's friends began to notice a change in her. She smiled more often, laughed with ease, and spoke with a quiet confidence that had been missing before. Some asked if she had met someone, though she never mentioned Rashid directly. It was not a relationship she felt ready to define aloud, nor did she feel any rush. Instead, she cherished the slow unfolding of trust and intimacy, recognizing that the foundation they were building was stronger than any hurried declaration could ever be. Rashid continued to show his care in subtle but meaningful ways. He remembered the small details of her life, the exact way she liked her tea, the book she had mentioned wanting to read, the favorite snack she enjoyed after long workdays. These details, though seemingly minor, carried great significance. Amina felt seen in a way she had never felt before, and the realization filled her with warmth and gratitude. It was a reminder that true love often speaks in quiet gestures rather than grand proclamations. One evening, as they sat together in the courtyard under the soft glow of the streetlights, Amina spoke about her childhood for the first time in detail. She shared the loneliness she had felt, the longing for affection, and the silent ache of never experiencing an embrace. Rashid listened intently, never interrupting, never offering empty reassurances. His calm presence was enough. In that moment, Amina felt understood in a way she had never experienced. The simple act of being heard, of having her feelings acknowledged without judgment, brought her a deep sense of relief and healing. Rashid, too, shared pieces of his past. He spoke quietly about his late wife, the life they had shared, and the grief that had followed her passing. He did not dwell on sorrow. Instead, he spoke of love, of memory, and of the quiet lessons that loss had taught him. Amina listened, fascinated by the depth of his experience and the gentleness with which he had carried his pain. She realized that love could survive absence, that connection could endure even after great loss, and that patience and care were essential to sustaining meaningful bonds. Their evenings often ended with long walks through the quiet streets nearby. They would talk about small things, the way the moonlight fell on the trees, the soft hum of the city, the way neighbors greeted each other. Sometimes they walked in silence, content in each other's presence, feeling the comfort of companionship without needing constant conversation. These moments taught Amina that love was not always about excitement or intensity. It could be quiet, steady, and profoundly fulfilling. Amina began to notice changes in herself beyond her emotions. She felt more confident in her work, more patient with those around her, and more open to new experiences. The warmth she had felt in Rashid's embrace had begun to spread into her daily life, influencing how she approached relationships, challenges, and personal growth. She realized that love could be transformative, not by dramatic gestures, but by consistent, gentle support. One day, Rashid invited Amina to help him care for a stray cat that had been lingering near the building. At first, Amina hesitated, unsure if she was ready to take responsibility for another living being. But as she watched Rashid patiently coax the cat closer, offering food and speaking softly, she understood the lesson he was teaching her. Love requires patience, kindness, and consistency. Together, they nurtured the cat, and through this shared act of care, Amina felt a deeper connection to Rashid and to life itself. Their bond continued to grow naturally. They celebrated small milestones, the arrival of spring flowers, the completion of a challenging work project, a quiet birthday or personal achievement. Each moment, though ordinary, became extraordinary because it was shared. Amina learned to appreciate the beauty in simplicity, to find joy in the everyday, and to recognize that love did not need to be flashy or dramatic to be real and meaningful. Amina also began to reflect on the past with a new perspective. She thought about the loneliness she had endured, the emotional distance she had experienced, and the longing for warmth she had carried for so many years. She realized that those experiences had prepared her to recognize and appreciate the love she was now experiencing. Rashid's patience and care had shown her that emotional intimacy could exist without pressure or expectation, and that the human heart was capable of healing when nurtured with gentleness. One afternoon, as they worked together in the courtyard, Rashid paused and looked at Amina with a quiet seriousness. "You've grown," he said softly. "I see the changes in you, the warmth in your eyes, the confidence in your steps. It's beautiful to watch." Amina felt a blush rise to her cheeks. She had never received such a direct, sincere acknowledgement before. His words were simple, yet they carried immense weight. She realized that love was not just about gestures or physical closeness. It was also about recognition, validation, and seeing the best in each other. As the months passed, their relationship became a steady rhythm of companionship, care, and emotional growth. Amina no longer feared closeness or vulnerability. She had learned that sharing her heart with someone trustworthy could bring healing rather than pain. Rashid's steady presence reminded her that love could be patient, enduring, and transformative. Each day, their bond deepened, not through grand declarations, but through consistent kindness, attention, and understanding. Amina began to see herself differently. She was no longer the lonely woman who had lived in quiet longing for decades. She was someone capable of receiving love, capable of giving it in return, and capable of recognizing the beauty in the ordinary. Rashid had shown her that human connection was not always dramatic or intense. It could be subtle, quiet, and profoundly meaningful. She felt gratitude for the lessons he had taught her, for the patience he had shown, and for the gentle awakening of her heart. One evening, as the city lights twinkled, and the breeze carried the faint scent of flowers, Amina and Rashid sat together in their favorite spot in the courtyard. They watched the world around them, the children playing quietly, neighbors greeting each other, the gentle sway of tree branches in the wind. In that moment, Amina felt a sense of peace she had never known. She realized that love could be simple, consistent, and quiet, yet powerful enough to transform a lifetime of loneliness into a life of hope and warmth. Rashid placed his hand gently over hers, a small gesture that spoke volumes. Amina smiled, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. The journey that had begun with curiosity, observation, and subtle gestures had grown into something profound. She had learned what it meant to be seen, understood, and cared for. She had discovered the power of quiet love, the strength of patience, and the beauty of shared presence. As they sat together, Amina reflected on the journey she had traveled, from childhood loneliness to the discovery of warmth, from quiet longing to emotional intimacy, from isolation to trust. She realized that love did not always arrive in dramatic ways. Sometimes it came silently, patiently, and gently, transforming life in ways that were profound yet understated. Rashid had shown her what it meant to be truly embraced, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well. Their story, though ordinary on the surface, was extraordinary in its depth and authenticity. Amina had learned that love could be patient, nurturing, and healing. She had discovered that connection was not about spectacle, but about attention, care, and the steady presence of someone who genuinely valued and understood her. And in Rashid's quiet companionship, she had found the warmth and intimacy she had longed for all her life. By the end of that period, Amina's life had fully changed. She walked with confidence, laughed with ease, and embraced the ordinary joys of life. Her heart had opened to love, trust, and connection. She knew that the journey was ongoing, that life would bring challenges, but she also knew that with patience, understanding, and care, love could endure, heal, and transform even the most lonely hearts. And so Amina sat beside Rashid, hand in hand, watching the quiet rhythm of life around them. She felt whole, safe, and profoundly grateful. She had never imagined that the warmth of an embrace, the steady presence of care, and the quiet patience of a compassionate heart could bring such transformation. But now she knew. She had experienced what true love could be, and it had changed her life forever.